Hello all, and welcome to another video. Now when you think of Nintendo and Sega today, when you think of Nintendo, you think of a company that is still going very strong and still making consoles and churning out instant classics right whenever they feel like it. However, when you think of Sega, you really think of what could have been had they not lost the console wars of the 1990s. Well, that's what I'll be covering today is the console wars of the 1990s. There were really three major competitors: Nintendo, Sega, and Sony. Our story begins in 1985, when Nintendo single-handedly saved the video game industry from the great crash of 1983, whenever they did a worldwide release of the then Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom if you're over in Japan. They had a stranglehold on the video game home market. That is until Sega came along. Up until that point, Sega was only known for their arcade games and various pinball machines that they had developed during the 1950s. That would all change in October of 1989, when they decided to up the ante on Nintendo in hopes of ending their stranglehold on the home market whenever they released a console called the Genesis, or Mega Drive if you are so inclined to call it that. It upped the ante as far as graphics go, from having an 8-bit style display, which is what the NES had, compared and upped it to 16-bit, which meant more colors, better graphics, better gameplay, you name it. And they had a 2-year start on Nintendo as far as the 16-bit era goes, but Nintendo would fire right back 2 years later in 1991 when they released the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or Super Famicom if you're over in Japan. And this pretty much blew the Genesis right out of the water. According to sales records posted by the BBC, the Super Nintendo outsold the Genesis in more ways than one, because they had better titles, the controls were a lot better as far as platforming and fighting games go, and they just had an overall better appeal to both North American, European, and Japanese audiences than the Genesis did. Now those two would duke it out for home console supremacy until 1995. By that point, the SNES was still going strong, and Sega had just released their newest console, the Saturn, which upped the bit resolution yet again, this time from 16-bit to 32, which yet again meant better resolutions, better graphics, better gameplay, and far more powerful hardware. But there would be a new challenger entering the fray, as in 1995, Sony would step into the picture, releasing the first iteration of the now popular PlayStation. It ran on had the same bit style hardware as the Saturn, and they both used CDs, compared to Nintendo still sticking with cartridges, which meant it was cheaper for the consumer to get disc games for the Saturn and PlayStation compared to the Super Nintendo at the time, which still used cartridges, because cartridges were a lot more expensive to make, therefore they had to charge people more. But Nintendo would ultimately up the ante to what it is now, going straight from 16-bit, skipping past 32, and going straight to 64. When in 1996, they released one of the most iconic consoles to date, the Nintendo 64. this console blew the Saturn and PlayStation right out of the water as far as graphics go. With its full 3D and much more powerful hardware, even though they still used cartridges, which limited developers on what they could do compared to discs. However, the end of the 90s would spell the end for Sega as far as making consoles go. When they released the Dreamcast in September of 1999, let's just say it was a commercial flop. Hardly any units were sold, and Sega after this just decided, you know what? We're done making consoles, we're just gonna make games for other consoles. Because by that time, Sony had released the PlayStation 2 in 2000, and then a year after that, Nintendo would release their Gen 6 console, the GameCube. Sega nowadays is just relegated to another developer, which is honestly sad when you think of what could have been had they not stopped making consoles. Thank you.